welcome to the second of our three-part series about Mark, the writer of Mark.
So last time we saw what an impact Mark's books had made over the last 2,000 years of history. And although chronologically 6 other books have been written before Mark, he was the first one who put pen to paper, or was it quill to parchment, to write the biography of Jesus. And indeed, it says it was so accurate that Matthew used about 90% of the book in his, and Luke used about 50% in his book.
We then looked at the missionary journeys with Barnabas and Paul, and how Barnabas gave Mark a second chance after he parted way with them halfway through the first trip. Today we'll look at his life before that. So, firstly, aged 32, assisting Paul and Barnabas. Secondly, age 34, evangelizing in Cyprus. And thirdly, age 45, writing the biography of Jesus. Working backwards with a few guesses at the time differences. So, age 30, he'd been receiving training from Barnabas, Paul and Peter. Age 28, he was praying for Peter's prison release. Age 15, he was following Jesus in an olive grove.
Yeah, do you want to do a Mark? Let's do a Mark. So we start off with Mark and Peter in Jerusalem. And up in Antioch is Barnabas and Paul. But then Barnabas and Paul travelled to Jerusalem, and they brought a monetary gift from the church in Antioch down to the Christians in Jerusalem, because there was a famine at the time. And then it looks like after a few years, Barnabas and Paul took Mark up with them to Antioch, which is, if you remember from last time, where they started the first missionary trip from.
So we told you it would be a quick trip, but there was a lot of things that happened to Mark during that time that made him the person he became. So firstly, let's look at Acts 12 and the story of the angel rescuing Peter from Jerusalem. You'll remember that when Peter realised he was in the middle of the street and not in prison, he went to a house where the believers were praying. I'm sure you know that story, but if not, it's worth taking the time to read it. A question, whose house was it? In Acts 12, verse 12, it says he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark. Imagine the impact this would have had on Mark. Praying as hard as they could, Lord, hear our prayer. Save Peter from being killed and tortured. Keep him safe from all harm and from all those cruel soldiers and guards. Lord, rescue him. And then, standing in his living room was Peter, a living proof of a miracle by God. Indeed, in one of his letters, Peter actually called him my son Mark.
So a quick side note before we go on. Let's think about it. This is our Miss Marple's moment. So Paul and Barnabas, when they came from Antioch down to Jerusalem, where did they stay? You know, the logic, certainly to me, would be that he would stay with family. And since Mark was Barnabas's cousin, he'd have probably stayed in that same house where they were meeting to pray for Peter's release. Paul also might have been there, but we know elsewhere in Acts that he talks about having a nephew, so he may have been staying with his family in Jerusalem. But the thing is, they would have possibly been there when they were praying for Peter's release. So you can imagine the impact that had on Mark, rubbing shoulders with some of the Christian leaders of his time, Paul, and Barnabas, and Peter. And so, in a sense, just living alongside them, how he would be trained of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. But we'll come back to the impact of those relationships in a minute or two. But first of all, another incident.
So this was in the dustiness light of night time. Go back perhaps another 7 years to AD 30, when Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, an incident that's only recorded in Mark's book. Then everyone deserted Jesus and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus, and when they seized him, he fled naked, leaving the garment behind.
Okay, so we're going to do another little bit of Miss Marple stuff, or whatever your favourite detective is, because again, just reading some of the background, some of the thought is that the reason it was written in Mark is because Mark was that young man. In the Greek, that young man means a youth, which is why we've said he was possibly a teenager and he's 15 at that time. But the thing is in that he was following Jesus. As a 15-year-old teenager, he was following Jesus. And although it's not normally considered that Mark, although it is considered that Mark got most of his material for his book from Peter, there must have been something, because he was in Jerusalem at that time, because that was where his house was, and he would have known the stories and been there firsthand to get the events of that first Easter.
So why was he there? Well, one thought is that his house in Jerusalem was the one where Jesus and his disciples shared the Passover meal. So when Mark heard Jesus leave, he followed him. The main thing to grasp is that from a teenager, Mark was a follower of Jesus.
So just think on the impact again of working alongside those Paul, Barnabas and Peter and the life of Mark. And perhaps, for us, just to take time to thank God for the people who've come into our life and shaped it. For me, I've got my Sunday school teacher, Alistair MacDonald, who led me to Jesus. I've got friends, Donald and June Ross, who welcomed me and other teenagers into their home and focused us on following Jesus, as well as having a lot of mad fun. And so the second thing I was thinking about is, who are we investing in? We being the Paul, Barnabas and Peter, who are investing in the new Marks to show that they can be the man and the woman that God designed them to be. I remember one summer when I was a teenager, spending a week in, best described as like a mobile home thing, driving around the west coast of Scotland. And part of the team was a man, I think must have been in his early 70s, who'd been a missionary in Burma. And I remember waking up one morning and seeing him on his knees, and when he's praying and when he said, Father, I knew that this man had a close relationship with God that I've always inspired to get to.
Recently, we talked with someone who's now in church leadership, who said the point that made an impact on her relationship with Jesus was when we had taken her to Spring Harvest.
As simple as that.
So no matter what our age is, how are we shaping the lives of others in their walk with Jesus? It may be on a one-to-one basis. It may be a member of your family. It may be through getting involved in work of Christians with children, youth or families. It may be as part of a small group. But be sure of this, our young people are watching us and listening to us. Let's make sure we give them an encouraging role model to follow as Jesus.
Mm. So hopefully you found those thoughts helpful to be what it means to be a follower of Jesus and set that role model. Next time, we're going to jump towards the end of Mark's life when he began to put quill to parchment and write that book that bears his name. Thank you for being with us today. Bye for now.
Bye.